Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the King and I Life podcast, hosted by myself, Soul Touch of the Poet, and my brother.
Soul X.
Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you subscribe to us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Follow our lives on Twitter. Like, subscribe, and share. Son Soul X, go ahead and give them the rest.
Yes, you guys can also reach us at KINGANDEYE369 at gmail.com. Again, that's King and I 369 at gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. If you have any ideas for topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or if you would like to be a guest on the show, please do so and give us a shout out at that email address.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. If you'd like to join the convo at any time, text your name to 347-778-1082. And if you would like to support the podcast, there is our Cash App. Everything that you donate goes back into the show to improve, and grow our platform.
Yes, sir.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we have a great episode for you guys. As you know, we definitely try to bring guests on who can contribute something to all of you out there, whether it's improving your life, giving you job opportunities, life lessons, experiences, and motivation, mentorship, whatever the case may be. Um, so with that being said, Son Soul X, go ahead and take it away for us.
All right. Well, today we have Mr. Stewart Gragg. And again, we'd like to thank you for coming on, sir.
Thank you.
Today, we're going to be talking about the trucking industry. With the state of the economy and inflation steadily rising, we take a look at the transportation industry. Most goods and services are delivered either by planes, trains, trucks, and automobiles. But the country relies on the trucking industry up to 70% of all freight deliveries. The total revenue reach in 2019 was $791.7 billion, ladies and gentlemen. B for billion.
That's a lot.
So that shows you how much this country relies on the trucking industry. The trucking industry alone employs millions of workers. In fact, the trucking industry makes up about 6% of the nation's workforce. So that's a lot of people. But if you would, sir, Mr. Gragg, could you give us a little bit or tell us a little bit about yourself, sir?
Sure. I'm 56 years old, born and raised on the west side of Birmingham, Alabama. Finished high school in 1983. Spent 8 years in the U.S. Army on active duty. Got out in 1992 in the aftermath of Desert Storm. Went into retail sales for about 7 years and just wasn't having the kind of career that I wanted to have. Kind of up and down in terms of income. And I'd always admired truck drivers. I can remember traveling between duty stations and assignments in the Army and seeing the way these guys interacted with each other on the road and things like that. I thought that'd be a neat way to make some money and see the country at the same time. So I began thinking about a career change in early 1999 and began training on June the 14th of that year. And my official date of hire with my first employer was July the 4th, 1999. So
Wow.
been behind the wheel ever since.
Wow. So like you, I took that active duty journey. So between active duty Army and trucking, how much of the country have you been fortunate to see?
Quite a bit between trucking, the Army, and ministry. I couldn't give you an exact number of states, but I've been everywhere, pretty much east of the Mississippi and about half the states west of the Mississippi. So it's been an incredible ride.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very extensive.
Yeah, it is. So outside of your passion for trucking, what are some of your other hobbies outside of trucking, like when you're relaxing and stuff like that?
Well, I'm also a Baptist minister. Currently, I am a deputation missionary. My wife and I are preparing to go to the Republic of Ireland, rather, to minister there. So that does not leave a whole lot of time for hobbies. But I do like to hunt and fish when I get the chance, and spend time with my grandchildren. I have 12 of them now, and
Ooh,
Wow.
they keep Grandma and Grandpa very busy.
I bet, I bet they do. Boy,
Extremely busy.
yes,
12? Man, that's a real blessing right there.
yes, it
Christmas
is.
is getting expensive, folks. It's a good problem to have. We'll take it.
Yes, sir, it
Yes,
is. Yes, sir, it
yes.
is. They will always
Mm,
remember that.
Amen.
mm, mm.
Um, so how long have you been in the trucking industry altogether? I'm sorry.
This is my 22nd year of trucking. I only spent 3 weeks of that over the road.
Mhm.
When I got into the industry, I committed to stay on the road for a year until I found an opportunity that would keep me closer to home. I only spent 3 weeks over the road. And when I got a phone call asking me if I'd be willing to deliver parts to General Motors dealerships in North Alabama and Middle Tennessee, and it was an opportunity I couldn't refuse. So only after 3 weeks on the road, I took a dedicated route. I had the same dealers that I delivered to 5 days a week, and I did that for 13 years. And in 2012, my employer was under bid for that contract, and we lost it. And the only option I had remaining with that employer was to go back over the road. And with a daughter still at home, that just was not an option for me at that point. So I
Hmm.
walked right next door to my current employer, and they put me to work making just as good, if not better, money, and was able to be home every night. And so I am very, very grateful for that.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, didn't have to go too far to find new employment, so that's
Right,
always
right, right,
good.
Well,
right next door.
true, right next door, absolutely.
Oh man. So when you made the well when it came time to make the decision of having a dedicated route as opposed to being over the road, was that a decision that you made on your own, or did you have that conversation with your wife and daughter?
Well, like I said, we had previously, when I started training, we had previously decided that we would commit to a year over the road,
Hmm.
get some experience under our belt. And if it involved changing employers to find something that would keep me closer to home, I was willing to do that. And as I said, after only spending 3 weeks on the road, an opportunity came available. So I didn't have to change employers or anything like that. So I got 13 years of stability
Mm.
right out of the chute as a driver.
Yeah.
Now, could I have made more money over the road? Of course I could have, but it meant more to me to be able to watch my kids grow up and participate in a lot of their activities, watch them participate in high school band and things of that nature. Of course, when you're a band parent, there are responsibilities that come along with that. You have to work concession stands at ball games and
Mm.
fundraising activities and things of that nature. And I got to
Hmm.
participate all of that and make some treasured memories. So
Hmm.
in that respect, trucking was very good to me.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So, if you would, could you talk us through a typical day from start to finish?
Well, for an over the road driver, it begins with most mornings with a phone call. A lot of times it can be done by text or messenger. There's other means of doing it now. When I started in 1999, a lot of that didn't exist. So you would start your morning with a phone call to your immediate supervisor, let them know where you were in your current work assignment, how far you had to go, how long you anticipated being, how long you felt like it would take to deliver the load, and once delivered, how many miles and available hours would you have to work that day. Just sort of get the lines of communications going. It tells them how they need to dispatch you for your next assignment. And as long as I made that phone call in the morning, things ran very smoothly. And from
Right.
that point forward, you are the boss. You are the captain of your ship. And as long as you obey all safety laws and safety regulations, uh, do what you're supposed to do, what your employer asks of you, there's a lot of freedom that comes with being your own boss. I mean, you turn on that radio, put your tunes on, and sometimes the older I get, the more I appreciate silence. There are days when I don't want to shut I want to shut the radio off. I get tired of hearing the nonsense on the radio and just to collect my thoughts. So whatever
Right.
floats your boat, you have the opportunity to do it in the cab of a truck. So now for a
Yes, sir.
local driver, uh, you have appointments to keep. Uh, you're expected to maintain a certain schedule. You're going to have to hustle a little bit more as a local driver, but the caveat is you're home every night. You get to go home to your wife and children, and it makes it worth it.
Yes, sir, it does. I have a CDL license, and I can tell you from my own personal experience, it was great while I was out there on the road. I did regional, and I did, just dedicated runs. And, I was fortunate enough to do or have a position where I worked for a company that we dealt in propane. So I was able to be at home every night. But as far as the trucking industry, it's real good to me. I still use my CDL license from time to time, and I just enjoy all the people that I've met over the years, and some of them I still keep in touch with. But as far as being a truck driver, there are several members of my family who actually have a CDL license as well, and we all enjoy the experience of being behind the wheel. So the truck industry has been very good to my family.
So I got a question.
Sure.
So you started back in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember, you know, as I was growing up and technology started to change and my parents and older family relatives as technology changed, they wanted to stick to what they're comfortable with and what they're used to. So in the trucking industry, I know, like, just from looking at trucks all my life, from being a military brat and traveling and all that other stuff, you can see the technology of these trucks change on the outside. So for you, with with the technology changes with the trucks and everything, was it a stubborn transition for you, meaning that you wish they would have left it the same, or is it a welcoming transition for you with all the technology that's with the trucks of today?
It's a mixed bag. In terms of onboard safety features, lane departure warnings, automatic braking systems from the computer senses you're too close to a vehicle in front of you. That takes some getting used to. You guys know as well as anybody in a major city, people are subject to drive across three lanes to get off at an
Yes.
exit,
Uh-huh,
cut
they will
right in
do
front of an
that.
cut right in front of an 80,000-pound missile and expect you to stop on a dime. And of course, the computer can activate the brakes a lot faster than you can. So, and I realize that we have a greater obligation to the motoring public. And so I'm not against any of that, but it did take some getting used to. Uh, in terms of electronic compliance, electronic logs, I think that was a major step forward for the industry.
Hmm.
Uh, Look, man, I remember the days of having to keep up paper logs. I don't miss it. Now, uh, could I make a paper logbook stand on its head if I had to? Absolutely. All right. But that catches up with you sooner or later. And the only people I think right now who are complaining about electronic logs are the cheaters. All right.
Mm,
And I know for the owner operators, it's a tremendous expense for them. But how long do you think you were going to delay this?
right.
It's a wave of the future. You're not going to change it. So you might as well bite the bullet now and get with the program.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because we use electronic logs, and the thing about it is, you have to definitely stay on top of it. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a heck of a lot easier, but it's one of those things you just have to be consistent with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, just a random question. Um, what is your favorite truck though to drive? Because me growing up, I always thought Peterbilts was were the finest trucks on the road.
Well, my previous employer, uh, I had a Freightliner Columbia. That
Hmm.
was the top of the line Freightliner. and it was a sleeper cab. I mean, if I'd had to go back over the road, I would have been quite comfortable in that truck. But when I started with my current employer, they had day cab Peterbilts.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought I would hear myself say this, but my day cab Peterbilt rides better than that sleeper cab Freightliner.
Wow.
So I would agree with your assessment. I think Peterbilts are the top of the line. The PACCAR MX-13 power plant, very smooth. Were it not electronically governed, 66 miles an hour, there's no doubt in my mind I could run 80. All right, I don't really want to do that, but I could if I wanted to. So there is plenty of power there. So one change that has been interesting is most employers now are shifting away from stick transmissions and clutches and going to the auto clutch for various reasons. Some feels like it allows them to hire more women. Let's face it, guys. Those old clutches are just not set up for women. Hats off to the ladies that can handle them, but that's mighty tough on ladies. So with these new auto clutches, it's just a matter of flipping a switch on the steering column and to change gears. And the 12 speed that we run, I mean, all you do is just line it up on the dock, flip it to reverse, and it creeps right up to the dock. All you got to do is keep it in line.
Stop.
So
wow.
that is a major step forward. So yeah, it's certainly been a blessing to me. And some drivers wouldn't agree with that, but this is just one man's opinion. It's been a blessing to me.
I had no idea. I mean, I knew the trucks and technology was coming forward, but I had no idea that they had all of that. When I knew that they were making automatic rigs, I was like, huh? Like, really? Because the first car that I learned how to drive on was a stick. So when I started driving the stick, it was like that's the world. But I heard people talking about these rigs and double clutching and all this, and I was like, oh, what is double clutching? And now they have automatics and lane departure, and that blows my mind. It really blows my mind.
Right. Double clutching is actually the way it's taught in driving school on an old stick. But once you gain some experience and you learn how to quote unquote float gears, very rarely does anybody use a clutch. So you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
why wear out your knees and ankles, right?
Exactly.
Well, I worked for one company, and we had an automatic, and it was the one that we used, to pull our vans with. And I'll tell you, I did not miss shifting all the gears. I'll be honest with you. It was kind of like the old school automatic, but still, I did not miss shifting all those gears.
When we first started with the auto clutches, the 10 speeds were a problem because on hills, they slip in and out quite a bit, a lot of noise. But once they made the transition to the 12 speeds, a lot of that's eliminated. It's just smooth, consistent delivery of power. And if you're not careful, it'll put you to sleep.
Oh, wow.
I'm not kidding when I say that. You really have to be a professional and, keep your eyes on the road and so forth. But the technology has come a long way.
Yes, sir. So we know that being a truck driver is really dangerous. What seems to be the most concerning part of your career to you, sir?
Well, it's a two-edged sword. Drivers have a responsibility, not just to their employers, but to the motoring public. We are the ambassadors of the roadways. Both the law and the public hold us to a higher standard. We are expected to manage the space around our vehicles. We're expected to operate at a safe speed. We're expected to maintain control at all times. Now, we're all human. We all make errors and, accidents do happen. But I'm concerned about the lack of training that young drivers have now. There's a term that I've heard in truck stops and other drivers they call 10-day wonders. When I started trucking, the very first thing you learned to do was back with a stick and a 53-foot sleeper cab truck, 53-foot cab, 53-foot trailer, sleeper cab truck. I'm not talking about just straight back. I'm talking about serpentine backing, alley backing.
Yeah.
You did not leave a company facility until they were satisfied that you could safely back that rig. The reason being, everything else comes much more naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Backing is the hardest thing, so they tackled that first. And you spent 2 weeks of classroom and idling around company facilities. They put you on the road for 3 weeks with a trainer. And when the trainer was satisfied that you could pass a CDL exam, then and only then were you allowed test. Now they give guys 10 days worth of training at fly-by-night driving schools and turn them loose on the motoring public.
Mm.
So I think the industry has some questions to answer there. I don't like it. Uh, Listen, they can squawk all they want to about driver shortage. The reality is, I don't think there's a driver shortage. There's plenty of qualified drivers out there. The problem is driver turnover, and it's caused by conditions such as that, having to drive with these people that are unsafe,
Right.
unsafe conditions. Uh, we can point fingers at the public all we want to,
Mm-hmm.
but you know that's always been there. You've always had quote unquote idiots on the roadways,
Right.
and they're always going to be there. So I don't think as a professional driver you can focus your attention so much on them. All you can do is control your vehicle, manage your space, do what you've been trained to do. And I don't really know how you can point the finger at the public, but
Mm-hmm.
accidents do happen.
Mm.
Yes.
So, in terms of speaking about these 10-day wonders, because there was a point in my 20s after I got off active duty where I
Hmm.
considered going to a trucking school, and I think the trucking school was probably like 2 months, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not exactly sure. But is it more the smaller companies, or is it the major companies, or is it a combination of the both?
Well, I think it's a combination of the three. There's pressure on companies; they need bodies to fill seats.
Mm-hmm.
All right, they have freight they have to get delivered. I get that, but is it worth the risk, both to themselves, to the drivers, and to the motoring public, to put someone with 10 days of experience out on the roadways alone?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think it can work. It's all in how it's managed. Uh, some students are going to catch on faster than others,
Right.
but it's a matter of, how do I say this? Uh, in sports, you hear the term called speed of the game. You
Mm-hmm.
know, when you step up from high school football to college football, one of the biggest differences is the speed of the game, and it takes time
Right.
to adjust to that. Uh, when you leave a four wheeler and climb behind the seat of a big rig, there is a huge difference in speed on the road, or how
Mm-hmm.
you perceive speed. And I just don't think 2 weeks of training is enough time for guys to get used to that. Uh, you got to learn how to manage your mirrors, learn to manage blind spots. You know, the most common phrase you hear uttered after an accident with a young driver, or an experienced driver for that matter: "I never saw him coming. I
Mm.
never saw that." All right. So complacency can happen to older drivers. Inexperience plagues the young drivers, and it can be scary at times.
Mm.
Yeah, it definitely can. So, how does your family feel about you being in this climate in the trucking world?
Well, my wife is used to it by now. Uh, Even with all the challenges out there right now, you can
Hmm.
still make a good living, all right, as a driver. The idea is to find your niche. Uh, if you're one of these guys that likes to see new places and new spaces, there's a place for you. If you want to be home every night, there's a place for you. Uh, if you want to drive part time, there's a place for you. Trucking is unique in that aspect, in that there's a place for everybody that wants to do this. And when I started pursuing ministry full time and left full time trucking, my employer has been very supportive of me. When I'm not on the road for the Lord and I'm home, uh, I'm welcome to come and haul freight for them. And it's good for me because it keeps me accountable to somebody. It keeps me from getting lazy. It also allows me to keep my skills sharp as a trucker.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
so nobody wants to drive Atlanta all the time, but that's where the freight is. You got to go get it. Or Baltimore or Chicago, wherever your particular market is.
Mhm.
But now as that, they've gotten used to it. My kids are grown and gone. We're empty nesters now. Matter of fact, I have one son. My oldest is a flatbed driver,
Mm-hmm.
and so he's kind of followed me into the industry, and it's working for him as well.
Wow.
Does that answer
Um,
your question?
Yes, sir, it does.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to some of the dangers. With a lot of the technologies on trucks today, do you do you see more or less accidents on the roads involving trucks than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago?
Uh, you're seeing more accidents, I think, on the road, but I think that's because there are more cars on the road now.
Hmm.
There are more people on the road now, and obviously there are more trucks on the road. Like you said, when 70% of our freight moves by truck, that's a lot of vehicles, and so it's hard for me to say. It really is.
Mm.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a lot. And like I live 30 miles north of Baltimore and I work in DC, and my commute is like an hour and a half. I see lots and lots of trucks.
Mhm.
Um, Now on these dedicated routes, um, how often when in terms of complacency, how often on the road do you yourself get frustrated with these drivers out here who just don't have a respect for the road, and knowing in yourself that you're an ambassador of road, you're held to a higher standard. How frustrating is that for you?
I have my days. There are days when I wish I had a couple of 50 caliber machine guns mounted on the fenders of my truck with a thumb trigger on the steering wheel so I could clear a path. Yeah, I'm just as human as anybody else. But that's where training and dedication come in. Knowing that you are held to a higher standard,
Mhm.
knowing that the safety standards set by your employer are high. This is why most companies offer safety bonuses now as an incentive for you to be a safe driver.
Mhm.
So, you know, those are things like that. I guess the word would be grounded. Those are the things that keep you grounded.
Right.
All right. The first and foremost thing you want to do is make it home to your family every night. And you don't have any control over the other guy, but you have absolute control over your ship. So
Mhm.
if you do what you are supposed to do, generally things are going to fall into place.
Okay.
Yes, sir. You're right
Okay.
about that.
Yeah. Um. Now, as far as your family is concerned, now when you first started driving over the road, let's say your daughter was older at the time, and it was just you and your wife. Uh, would your wife ever have considered, or would you both have considered you both going on a road?
Uh, my wife wouldn't have. Uh, she might have made one or two trips with me a year for sightseeing purposes,
Hmm.
but she saw her duty as being the keeper of the home.
Hmm.
You know, taking care of the children, the grandchildren, making sure their needs were met. And when I'm away, somebody's got to make sure the bills are paid, and the household duties stay done. And that's not a put down to her. That's what she says her role,
Right.
her contribution to this. So it's something we do as a team.
Hmm.
And she felt like that was her contribution. And I thank God for her. I couldn't have done it without her.
Right. Yeah, because when I was growing up and I used to see, like, I would see a truck and then I see a man and a woman get out the truck and I'd be like, that would be so cool to travel with my wife all across the country in a truck.
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
plenty of team drivers
What
to
do you
do.
been married about 15 years? All right. You might have different thoughts on that.
That is true. That is true. But as a child, not knowing any better, that's like the coolest thing on the planet.
Yes, sir.
Oh
So,
man.
so we know that you had a very extensive career in this line of work. With that being said, was there ever a time when you found yourself maybe so frustrated that you're like, I'm thinking about giving this up?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Uh, Let me put it in terms I think people can relate to. You hear a lot of bashing of the so-called millennial generation today, the
Mm-hmm.
young
Hmm.
people between the ages of 25 and 40.
Mm-hmm.
Several years back, I mean, that's who your college graduates were. The
Right.
University of Alabama has one of the better logistics management programs in the nation, and my employer hires a lot of those young people right out of college. And you've got these young 20 somethings that are bright eyed and bushy tailed. They've got all these great ideas of how they're going to transform the trucking industry.
Till
And
get in
they
there.
come in the door and they're going to tell 20, 25, 30-year veteran drivers how to do their job. I don't have to tell you guys that's a recipe for conflict.
Boy.
And it
Definitely.
was very, very frustrating to deal with. But generally, uh, you sit down and you talk to these young people, and you can generally work things out. Eventually, you come to an understanding. Uh, you understanding. I come to an understanding of what he's facing, the deadlines and schedules that he has to meet. I try to give him some sense of the pressures that we face out on the road. Sometimes that varies by customer. Some
Right.
customers can be more demanding than others, and eventually, uh, you learn to be extend a little grace toward them, and they tend to be a little more patient and learn that everything is not as their professor told them it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes time, but eventually you develop a good working relationship, and that's the idea. Uh, it's give and take. You're not going to get what you want all the time, and he's not going to get what he wants all the time. But it's a give and take. But you learn to work with each other. Some days you win, some days you lose. But the neat thing about this business is people have short memories. You come in the next day, yesterday's forgotten, today's a new day. Let's move forward.
Okay.
Yeah. That's definitely the best way to look at it because in the trucking industry, our dispatchers, it's kind of like our lifeline, and we are to
Right.
him. Um, the dispatcher is going to be there to help you with the loads. They're going to be there to help you when you have personal things come up. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
that relationship alone is the one that is the most important. I mean, the company do what they do, but when you work with a great dispatcher, it makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. And we're very fortunate. These young people are well trained. It's not that they don't know what they're doing. It takes a while for the people skills to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And once those begin to come into place, good things happen for everybody.
Yeah, understandable. Um, so if at whatever point in your trucking career that you came to the point where you was like, I don't want to do this anymore, what are your three top jobs that you would have done in place of trucking?
Hmm. Well, I got into trucking as an older fella. I was 34 when I got my CDL, so my options were limited. Uh, I couldn't go back in the military. I was getting too old for police work.
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, when you're over, you're, heaven forbid you hit 40, you're a heart attack looking for a place to happen to a lot of employers then. So, quite honestly, uh, being a minister, I had that, the Lord's work, and I was grateful for that. But in terms of secular employment, I don't know what I would have done.
Mm.
I didn't really have any interest in doing anything else. And a lot of times, you're going through those frustrating seasons, the only thing that keeps you going is hanging on to why you got into this business to begin with. The freedom of the open road,
Mm-hmm.
being your own boss once you leave that terminal in the morning. A lot of times that's what keeps you going.
Mm. So it I guess it's safe to say that you prefer that instead of being in a typical 9 to 5.
Absolutely. I cannot envision myself chained to a desk and a computer. I mean, I left that world when I left retail automotive sales. I got out of that. I departed from that world forever. And I'm not. Look, I'm not bad mouthing car salesman. I was one. I made good money at it,
Mm-hmm.
but it got old. The hours, uh, uh, the industry and the market changing constantly. It's a lot to have to adapt to. And as you get older, it's just not that easy to do that anymore. And
Right.
I finally just decided to go and pursue something I wanted to do, something I had a genuine interest in. And it's been good to me.
Okay.
Excellent. Excellent. So, what was the most unusual thing that you have encountered during your career? Like, what you may have been driving and you came upon a scene and you were like, "What in the world is going on here?"
Well, there are several of those. As a young driver, I guess I had been with my first employer about 4 months. I was finally solo, and I was sent to New Orleans to relieve a driver who had to go and retrieve his daughter's body from college out in Texas. She had
Oh
passed
wow.
away in an accident in college. Of course, I was happy to go help him.
Hmm.
But in running his route one night, I came up on an intersection. Just across the river from New Orleans there, and me and two other trucks hit it about the same time. It was a drug deal gone bad.
Oh wow.
And I have never seen so much glass, shell casings, blood, uh, dead bodies. We beat the police there by about 2 minutes. And it's like, do I get out and help somebody, try to help somebody, or do I stay in my truck?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's safer to stay in the truck, but at the same time, there could be somebody here that needs help. You know, it's hard to tell from the cab of the truck. And while that debate is going on in my mind, the police showed up. Of course, first responders showed up not long after that. But that's something that has never left my mind all these years. I don't know who lived or who died,
Mm-hmm.
and it just I don't know. Those are images that just never go away. And then there's the deer that run off the side of the run from the side of the road and run under your truck or run under your trailer and
Yeah.
rip your airlines out. Now and then you've got to yeah, that causes problems. So you're trying to keep a trailer straight so you can get it to the side of the road. But no, the incident in New Orleans really sticks out in my mind, and I don't ever want to see that again.
I bet.
When it comes to like deers trying to play chicken with rigs and stuff like that, is if you like out of the corner of your eye, you're riding down the road, and stopping the rig going 65 miles per hour, whatever the speed limit is like I can't slam on these brakes. Um how do you mentally prepare to interact with that situation? um like what is the thought process in your mind as far as your safety, the safety on the road, and just the overall situation awareness? Walk us through that.
Well, from your earliest days as a truck driver, you're trained that animal strikes are a possibility. It's always something you have to be on the lookout for. It doesn't matter if it's a deer, a large dog, or a cow for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you are watching the way you should be, managing the space around your vehicle, if you see that animal at a distance and think they might walk out in front of your truck or run out, the first thing you do on a highway, tap out of the cruise control,
Mm-hmm.
start slowing the vehicle. You make sure that should you need to change lanes, you don't have someone in the lane next to you. All right. If you do, and there's no other alternative to safely move the vehicle, then you are to hit that animal.
Mm-hmm.
You hold your line. It is always safer for the driver to hold the trucking companies would much rather pay for damage to the truck than to pay medical bills or
Right.
perhaps funerals on a carload of folks that you ran over. So you don't ever want to change your lane unless you have to, and unless you have room to do it in that situation. But if all else fails, you hit the animal.
Mm-hmm.
And now having forward facing onboard cameras, that's one situation where that camera would be a benefit to a driver
Mm,
because the safety department can look at that video and analyze what happened and determine whether or not the video matches the driver's story.
mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you tell somebody that you hit a deer, and the truth is you fell asleep at the wheel and ran off the road, they better be able to find some deer hair in that grill of your truck. You better have a
Yeah.
carcass or some hair somewhere that you can as evidence, right?
Right.
Or you got a lot of explaining to do.
Mm, mm. Wow. How much damage does a deer or a cow cause to a rig that's going down the road?
Well, a deer can tear your grill up, tear your front bumper fascia up, but it's not likely that striking a deer, you're going to lose a wheel or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. You should
Hmm.
still be able to maintain a reasonable degree of control over the vehicle. A lot depends on the angle of the strike and so forth. But if you strike a large animal, a moose, a cow, an elk, or something like that, and moose are a problem in places like Maine.
Mm-hmm.
You got a lot of paper mills up in Maine and a lot of moose up there. They're subject to run out in front of you at any time. So the larger the animal, the more likely you are to have damage to your steering components.
Mm.
And I don't even want to think about hitting a cow. But in Texas, it happens more often than you think.
Mm.
So, just to give you guys or our listening parties a little more facts about the trucking industry, I'm going to throw some out there for you guys. So, the trucking industry facts and figures. Uh, 80.4% of the nation's freight bill came from the trucking revenues in 2019. There was 928,647 for hire carriers and 799,342 private carriers on file in April of 2020. Um, 13.4% of all registered vehicles are commercial trucks. The industry today's revenue reached again in 2019 $791.7 billion, ladies and gentlemen.
Mm. Wow, that's a lot. So Stewart, in terms of those numbers, the fluctuating rate of commerce moving over the road, inflation, tariffs, and all types of stuff like that. Um, how does that affect a dedicated route driver compared to an over the road driver?
Well, a dedicated route driver is usually making a dedicated salary. He has a set rate of pay that's been pre-negotiated. That's written into a contract between the carrier and the customer. So generally, those things are not going to impact him very much until the contract comes up for renegotiation. At that point, there's always a possibility that your current employer could be under or outbid for that contract, and you may have to look at another dedicated account.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, working the General Motors account, whenever those contracts were let, those were 4-year contracts. So that was generally speaking, that was 4 years of stability for the driver.
Mm-hmm.
So anything if they had to make minor adjustments and allowance for fuel and things like that, those kinds of things were handled internally between the carrier and the customer. It
Mm-hmm.
had little or no impact on the drivers. Now, for owner operators, it's a different story. I mean, you are your own company. You do your own negotiating. You find your own freight loads. You pay your own taxes. You buy your own base plates. Those things would tend to affect owner operators a lot more than they would dedicated drivers.
Mm.
So,
Okay.
from your personal experiences and some of the people you've met in the industry, um, do you hear that being a owner operator is more lucrative or worth the hassle, or do you think just working for a company is better, or do it just depend on
Well,
the individual?
it does. A lot depends on the individual, what your personal goals are. how much money you want to make, what's a priority for you and what isn't. A lot depends on, do you live near major freight lanes? For example, I 10, I 40 are major freight lanes going east and west. I 75 and I 95 would be major lanes going north south. Of course, there'll be a lot more freight moving on those highways, a lot more opportunity to make money. Those are things that owner operators would have to consider.
Right. Well, with there being so many commercial vehicles on the highways, do you feel as if the country is doing a good job on regulations, or do you think there's a need for more regulation, or some regulations you just don't need?
Well, generally speaking, uh, I don't think regulations necessarily need to be overhauled, but I do think they need to be tweaked. As I understand it, uh, the regulations that govern the trucking industry are a part of maritime laws that date back to the late 1920s, when trucking and shipping were much more closely wed than they are today.
Hmm.
And there's just not a whole lot of, shall we say, appetite in Congress to overhaul those laws. Uh, the trucking associations, they have their lobby on Capitol Hill. The owner operators have their lobby on Capitol Hill. And between all these organizations and, you know, interest in Congress, very rarely does anything get changed. I mean, it's at the point now where it really doesn't matter what the drivers think. Money drives the bus on Capitol Hill, and whoever's putting the most money in the campaign coffers of the politicians, their will is going to carry the day. So I wish that were not the case, but unfortunately, it is.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I definitely feel your sentiments on that. So, have you ever been in independent driver? If so, do you feel what are the pros and the cons to being an owner operator?
Well, I have zero experience as an independent contractor. My next mile as an independent contractor will be my first. All right, but
Hmm.
and really don't have any interest in doing it. Uh, but for those who have that entrepreneurial spirit, want to have their own business and get out there and get it done, you can still do that. But I would encourage them to keep an eye toward Capitol Hill, because some of the legislation that's pending before Congress right now, if it is passed, it is going to destroy the current owner operator model. It's going to get much harder for owner operators to make a living. It's going to be impossible for them to compete against the larger truckload carriers. As an owner operator, the only thing you have to sell is service.
Hmm.
All right. If you can't get a load to a customer faster than a truckload carrier can, then what reason do you have to charge that customer more money than the truckload carrier? So, for example, if Congress decides to limit all commercial vehicles in this country to 65 miles an hour, then the owner operator has lost his competitive advantage. So it's going to be awful hard for him to make the kind of money he wants to make and deliver the kind of service for his customers that they expect. All right, when he's limited like that. So that's just one example among many I can think of. Uh, the way that fuel taxes are calculated, for example, it's been talked about now with the advent of electronic logs. They want to start charging trucks for every mile that they drive.
Hmm.
All right. And
What?
obviously, the big trucking companies would be able to absorb that much better than an independent contractor would be. Oh, yes, this is being talked about for Congress right now. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's being seriously considered that trucks will be charged federal highway use taxes based on each mile that they drive, not a set rate. So that's not good news for owner operators.
No, not at
Hmm.
all. That's gonna
Wow.
make it dang near 10 times as harder, if anything.
Hmm. Yeah. So we have a question from one of our viewers, Katrina, and she says, "Are
Mm-hmm.
there any regulations for the most hours you can drive a day and the amount of hours needed for rest?" Now, I know this probably would affect over the road drivers more, but is there an instance where that could affect the dedicated route driver such as yourself?
Well, yes, it applies to everybody. The only people who have exemptions to hours of service rules, if I'm not mistaken, those who are involved in intrastate commerce as opposed to interstate commerce. Intrastate commerce would be like pulpwood drivers, you know, hauling pine trees for, the paper industry and things like that. As long as they're not crossing state lines, they have some exceptions to hours of service rules.
Mm,
But it doesn't matter if you're dedicated, independent contractor. We all fall under if you're involved in interstate commerce, we all have the same rules.
mhm,
You're allowed a maximum of 70 hours per week, 14 hours per day, 11 of which can be driving. All right. You can drive for 11 hours. The other 3 hours of your workday can be used for loading and unloading, you know, on duty, not driving situations. Now, for every 8 hours of work time, you must take a 30-minute break. All
say
right.
that
That's a
again.
federal regulation. For every 8 hours of work time,
Okay.
uh, you have to take a 30-minute break. Now, the government last year did slightly amend the regulation. If you were sitting in an on-duty status, you don't have to be off duty to get credit for that 30 minutes break. If you're sitting in an on-duty status for more than 30 minutes, then that will reset your 8-hour clock.
Mm.
So they did cut the drivers some slack in that regard. But otherwise, if you're involved in interstate commerce, we all have to meet the same hours of service rules.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought that with dedicated route drivers, especially if you leave out 6 o'clock in the morning and you're back home, maybe 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. I, I wouldn't so much think that would affect them as much. I mean, mainly because you go out in the morning, you're back home in the evening. So I
Mm-hmm.
would have assumed that there's a little more latitude in the maximum hours that you can drive per week. Because I know per day it's like there's no likelihood of you really driving that much especially if you have a short route.
Well, keep in mind it's a 70-hour work week. So if you work 8 hours locally one day and then 12 hours the next, you've only used 20 of your 70 hours.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's some you can work with it. You can still work within that 70 hours. Have the flexibility you need to complete a work day, within the 70-hour limit.
Hmm. Okay. So Katrina has another question. She says, "Do you log your hours, and what happens if you violate them? What are the fines, penalties, if any?"
Well, if you do not, everyone is required to have electronics logs now. If you cannot provide your hours of service to a qualified law enforcement officer, if you cannot demonstrate those hours, they will place you out of service until you can. At that point, they will contact your employer. If you're self-employed, they want to know who's handling your electronic logs. You're not moving until you provide the information that they need. And if you are determined to be out of compliance, uh, fines, citations uh, will be issued. And in certain instances, don't quote me on this, but if you are so far out of whack on your books, if you've been driving for 48 hours, I mean, you're probably going to go to jail. So
Oh,
jail is a
wow.
real possibility too. So
Hmm.
again, we have an obligation to the public not to do that kind of thing, but in any industry, you always have a handful of rogues that gives everybody else a bad name. And in that sense, trucking is no different.
Hmm. So, so essentially, what you're saying is, if you get pulled over by a law
Mm-hmm.
enforcement officer, they can put you out of service.
Yes, you have to demonstrate your hours of service. Now, if you have electronic logs, you have to show that officer that you are in compliance. The burden of proof is on you.
Hmm.
And if you can't prove that you are in compliance with federal motor carrier safety regulations, they will place you out of service until such time as you can. And if you are determined to be out of compliance, all right, the severity of your out of compliance will determine what penalties you pay, whether it be a fine, a citation, or in certain rare circumstances, maybe even jailed.
Wow.
Okay, so let's just say you are 5 minutes outside of your maximum time that you're supposed to be driving and you get pulled over.
Mm-hmm.
Are there a lot of strict officers, or will they be like, hey, I'm gonna need you to go lay down somewhere, whatever the case may be?
All right. If you are a local driver, well, I think this applies to over the road drivers as well. There is what is called the safe harbor provision in the law.
Okay.
If you are, say, 15 to 20 minutes from your destination and you're going to park it for the day, you won't be driving anymore until your 10-hour break is up. Uh, yeah, you can do that. All right. And
Okay.
a seasoned law enforcement officer can look at your logs and see that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's not your logs and your bills of lading and determine that. So, most officers know that parking, one of the unintended consequences of having everybody go to electronic logs at the same time is it created a shortage of parking.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now the rogues are having to abide by the rules. And if you don't get to a truck stop, say between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, you're going to have a hard time finding a place to park.
Mm.
So they know that parking is limited. And if you are that close to your destination, chances are they're going to allow you to apply the safe harbor provision. They might escort you to it,
Mm-hmm.
or may just let you drive on. But if you can demonstrate substantial compliance, most law enforcement officers are not going to give you a hard time.
Mm. Wow. So is that why sometimes at rest stops and stuff you see trucks lined all the way across, like down the highway on the shoulder, because of that parking
All the
thing?
parking places are taken. You see the off ramp taken up. You see the entrance ramp coming out of the rest area taken up. That's exactly why. All right. Some states, it is not a good idea to ever park on an exit ramp in a
Mm-hmm.
big rig because speeds are higher. You're much more likely to have a four-wheeler collide with you. If you're going to do that, it's always better to take an entrance ramp because they're
Mm.
entering that ramp at a much slower speed, and
Right.
so they have a better opportunity to see you. But some states don't allow that at all,
Mm.
and so you got to find somewhere to park that rig. And again, that's your responsibility as a driver. And until that situation rectifies itself, is it going to cut into your income? Probably, but you have to learn how to manage that. That's still your responsibility as a professional driver.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Um, I have another question. Um,
Sure.
I was told several years ago that only state troopers, highway patrol, and transit officers are the only ones who are qualified to pull over a trucker. Is that true?
That is not true. I can tell you in Jefferson County, Alabama, the sheriff's department has a truck inspection team. The
Hmm.
city of Birmingham Police Department has a truck inspection team. Now, the only time you will see those teams deployed is if there's a problem with trucks in a certain area, if they've
Hmm.
got an excessive number of complaints and things of that nature. But that is not true. All right, that is not true at all. Now, any law enforcement agency, provided that officer, is trained, all right,
Hmm.
can cite you, they can inspect you. So, me personally, if you get pulled over, I'm not going to look. The side of the road is not the place to argue with the officer. I'm not going to question the who's or why's and whether or not he has the authority to do this. Do what you're asked to do, and let your corporate legal team fight that battle. Okay.
Right.
What you want to do is get to your destination, get that load delivered, get your next load, and get home to your family. Okay? And
Hmm.
the less time you spend arguing with the officer, the more likely that is to happen.
Okay.
Makes perfect sense.
Yes, it does.
So,
Man.
would you recommend this line of work to anyone looking to start a new career?
It depends on who you are and what you want out of life. As I said earlier, there is a place for anyone in this industry. All right. If you're willing to work, you're willing to put in the hours. If you enjoy being your own boss, the freedom of the open road, uh, yeah, there's a place for you. Would I recommend this? Yes, I would right now, but I would also caution people to keep an eye on the current regulatory climate, uh, monitor the things that are before Congress, see how that's going to impact drivers, particularly owner operators' ability to make a living, and then make your decision. but there are a lot of reputable carriers out here. Uh, this is one industry, gentlemen, I have never had to worry about my paycheck.
Hmm.
It's all done by direct deposit. Now, occasionally they do make mistakes. If you're an over-the-road driver, if you don't get your bills submitted in time, which is what the basis on which you are paid, uh,
Hmm.
perhaps you won't get paid for it that week, but it will be on your next paycheck. If
Hmm.
you're an over-the-road driver and you need a cash advance to help with an incident or a road repair, there are means available to do that. Uh, they'll take good care of you if you do your job as a professional. So, yes, I would recommend this line of work to anybody that is looking for freedom of the open road and being able to be their own boss. So, yeah, there's a place for you out here.
Okay.
So, with that being said, and this is our last question for you. What do you love most about being in the trucking industry?
What do I love most about being in the trucking industry?
Yes,
The
sir.
people. When I entered the Army, one of my drill sergeants told me that long after your active duty days are over, you're not going to remember the sleepless nights. You're not going
Hmm.
to remember the long road marches or any of that stuff. What you're going to remember are the people that you serve with.
Yes.
And that proved to be very true. And that is especially true of trucking. Men that I've worked shoulder to shoulder with for years, to see them retire, uh, see them oftentimes some are young enough to retire from trucking and go into another career field. Uh, Some decide to go home and go fishing with their grandkids. And, you know, to have been able to work with the quality of people that I have, who just, man, it don't matter if you're red, yellow, black, or white. If you want to show up here, do your job, pay your bills, raise your kids, and left alone, this is a good industry for you. And to have worked shoulder to shoulder with those men and women is an honor. It's an honor. And
Hmm.
once I'm on the mission field as a missionary, I'm going to miss every brother and sister truck driver that I drove with. And but I got memories I'll carry in my heart forever. So there is a camaraderie between drivers
Yes.
out here. It's not as tight as it used to be,
Hmm.
but you gentlemen are drivers, so you know what I'm talking about. But that bond is still there. And when another driver's in trouble out on the road, to have 3 or 4 big rigs pull over and try to help him put out
Mm.
an axle fire, things of that nature. You don't see that in a lot of lines of work,
You really
you know.
don't.
And those are days when you really count your blessings. You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
thank God that you've been allowed to be a part of this, and that's certainly true of me.
Yeah, I can hear that in your voice, and it's being me being in military for 26 years between active duty, Army National Guard, and Air National Guard. I can definitely relate to what you're saying right there. Um, you look at it and you look at the memories, the people that you've come across, you look at the good days, the bad days, and when it's time to hang it up, you like, man, I'm gonna miss this. You know, hey, I did my time and whatever case may be, but that's truly something to admire, something to miss. Um, but so Katrina has another question. She says, "What
Sure.
state is the most memorable destination that you've traveled that was you love traveling through, and what is the worst?"
Well, the worst. This is a personal thing. I can't stand driving I-285 around Atlanta, especially on that, especially that north side during rush hour. It's just absolutely maddening. And for drivers who have driven that, they know what I'm talking about. And I'm
Mm,
sure DC and Chicago and other areas are just as bad. But in terms of area that I like to drive the most beautiful stretch of highway I've ever driven was US 90 between Van Horn and Del Rio, Texas. I can remember leaving El Paso with a load. The sun goes down. There's a pilot truck stop right there at the Van Horn exit, and where the I-90 meets Interstate 10. And when you turn south on 90 there, or actually it's going east, uh, and you see the lights in that truck stop in your rear view mirror, you are heading into wilderness. I mean, you're going through mountainous areas, desert, there's tumbleweed out there. And I can remember finding a roadside rest stop in the state of Texas that ran, and I was near the end of my hours, and I fell asleep listening to the Texas Rangers game on AM radio.
Wow.
And I woke up the next morning to the most beautiful sunrise I'd ever seen, and little road runners running around all over the place. But I rolled that window down and made sure that it was safe for me to get out of the truck, looked around, and I just stood there and watched that sunrise. And that was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen at that point. And I don't know that I'll ever see it again, but that's a treasured memory of my trucking career. That one stretch of highway, even though it's desert, it has a beauty all its own, and you would just have to see it for yourself to believe it.
Yeah, you said that, and I was just going to ask you, have you ever just pulled over, like you had the time and you just pulled over, got out your truck and just took in nature, took a breath of fresh air, and just, I mean, got that feeling that is, remarkable, unbelievable, something that, you can put in words, but the experience of observing that, like, it is like nothing ever in life.
Yeah, that was one of them. You're thinking, Lord, how did I manage to stumble into this? And it doesn't matter what your problems are. It doesn't matter what your challenges for the work day are. You just stop, take a deep breath, and like you said, just absorb what you're seeing. And it's just you can't put a price tag on that.
No, you sure can't.
I don't care if it's the mountains of West Virginia or the deserts of West Texas. We've got a beautiful country. There's a lot of it to see, and you can do that in the trucking industry.
Yeah, I'm sure, because a lot of people crack jokes on me because I'm known hop in my car, get on the road, and drive from Maryland to Florida to Missouri to anywhere, and they like, "What is wrong with you? Why don't you just take a plane?" I'm like, "It's the road." Like, and to have the luxury of hopping out your car and be like, "Oh, I'm at this state line," it's priceless to me.
To see the clouds on the mountains of East Tennessee and Western North Carolina late in the day or early in the morning. You don't get that kind of view everywhere.
Yeah.
No, you sure don't.
You sure
Even
don't.
the swamps of Louisiana. I can remember driving to a little town in Louisiana, Golden Meadow, way down in the bayou. There's one road in and one road out. And you're driving along the road, and the bayou is literally to your left. You make one wrong move, you're going to be sitting in that bayou, you and the truck. And you see these big shrimp boats coming in off the Gulf. Their night's work is done, and they pull their boat up to a dock right behind this big, beautiful house here. And this is not a life I could live, but I'm glad I got to see how these people live.
Right? Yeah.
This land has a beauty all its own too. So.
Yeah. Definitely. Oh man. But it was a pleasure having you on and getting your take, your insight, your knowledge, and everything on the trucking industry. I tell you, having this conversation with you, it definitely makes me wish that when I had the desire in my 20s to get on the road, I wish I would have jumped on that opportunity. But at that time in my life, I was like, nah, I might miss something and this, that, and the other. But listening to you really makes me wish I would have taken up that opportunity in the early years.
Well, God had other plans for you.
Yeah.
We all go through that young and stupid phase, so
yeah.
you can't dwell on that too much.
No, we sure can't.
Yeah.
But we just want to thank you, Mr. Stewart, for coming on and again
Yes,
giving
sir.
us your insight and sharing your experiences uh, and your viewpoint from behind the wheel of an 18 wheeler. Um, I enjoyed this. This is great.
Yes.
Um, so once again, thank you for coming on, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed.
So we want to thank everybody who tuned in and watched this episode of the King and I Life podcast.
Yes,
Again, you
yes.
guys can find us on all of the major podcast platforms. You can also find this interview on YouTube. Again, you'll find it here on Facebook, and you can also find it on Twitter.
Yes, sir.
So thanks again for everything.
And with that, hey, tune in next time. We got more great stuff coming up for y'all. Um, and that's all I have. So touch it. I mean, Sun Soul, like, you got anything else for them?
Oh yeah, we do have another riddle that we will be posting for our last T-shirt giveaway. So you guys be on the lookout for that.
Stuart, do you have anything to say to the people before we sign out?
Oh yeah, and,
It's
and
been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
is there a way that people can reach you if they wanted to find out any more information about the trucking industry?
Sure. Look me up on Facebook,
Good
Stewart
deal.
Gragg.
Look them up if you have questions. You want to know, you want to get into industry or anything. Look him up, Mr. Stewart Gragg. Again, it was a pleasure having you on here. Very, very. I mean, this hands down, this is a great episode. So again, thanks for joining us. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. Thanks for interacting and all that good stuff. We love y'all. Peace and blessings to everybody. And that's all I had.
Thanks, Katrina.
And we are out of here.